Dear esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is of course very difficult for me to address you now because I don't have a clue what the other speakers have said. Maybe they have already covered everything I am going to talk about, so please bear with me because I'm functionally impaired every time I go to Spain. I cannot speak or understand Spanish, in spite of the fact that you are the second largest language on this planet. So please bear with me. Nearly all countries in the world are in complete or near complete denial of a herd of elephants in the room, namely adverse health effects of modern artificial electromagnetic fields, such as from mobile phones and wireless networks, and the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. From the current vast scientific literature, it is obvious we must proceed with caution before immersing the citizens in more and more artificial electromagnetic fields. We may, as a matter of fact, already be gravely endangering our current as well as coming generations. To not act today may prove a disaster tomorrow, and such lack of action may again result in the classical late lessons from early warnings. I, as a scientist, is not here to promote convenience or economic growth, but only serve and protect. And to serve and protect human health and biological safety, as well as to protect other animals, plants, and bacteria. And these aims must be our only target, especially when we meet at the Faculty of Medicine. The history can be very, very long. This is a short version. As you know, the World Health Organization has already cancer classified power-frequent magnetic fields, which is a long word for household electricity, as possibly carcinogenic in class 2B. 10 years after that, in 2011, the World Health Organization also classified all forms of radiofrequent electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic in the same 2B category. And, the Council of Europe, as you have heard about already, they suggested 2011 to ban mobile phones and wireless networks in schools. And they said that they concluded that immediate action was required to protect children. In Sweden, nothing happened. And I think very little happened here in Spain too. So the immediate action was completely forgotten. 2016 to 18, the American National Toxicology Program, together also with the Ramazzini Institute from Italy, have shown brain and heart tumors after exposure to mobile phone radiation, and the studies were done in rats. And now we come to the first paradox. When I asked parents if they want to put their children in schools where they will be exposed to class 2B carcinogen, like, you see, if I point here now, like DDT, lead, formaldehyde, petrol and diesel exhausts, or welding smoke, no parent so far has ever said, yes, that's exactly what I want to do with my child. And then I tell them that they already are putting them in exposure to a 2B carcinogen. And please excuse my English, parents then get pissed. Not at me, but they get very angry with the health authorities, the radiation protection authorities, the governments and parliaments, who has not told them about these facts, enabling them to make an informed choice for their children. So, in Sweden, for instance, and here in Spain, we love our children, of course. We put on reflective vests, yellow plastic helmets, bicycle helmets, colorful overalls. But when it comes to the effects of man-made artificial electromagnetic fields, they are completely naked. And I will come back to that later on. I will dwell a little bit on the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. And maybe the previous speakers have already covered all of it, but let's repeat. In Sweden, electrohypersensitivity is an officially fully recognized functional impairment. This is very important to understand. It is not regarded as a disease. Persons with electrohypersensitivity are not patients, they are persons. The same year, 2000, the Nordic Council of Ministers also classified the symptoms of electrohypersensitivity as an occupationally related symptom-based diagnosis. So it's already in the International Code of Diagnoses from the World Health Organization, but that's about the symptoms. This means that the person with electrohypersensitivity, of course, can visit a doctor to get the painkiller for a headache, for instance, or to get paperwork so that they could have a sick leave from their work, or to get an electrosanitized car, or. The persons with electrohypersensitivity in Sweden have their own handicap organization, which is called the Swedish Association for the Electrohypersensitive. They are included in the Swedish Disability Federation, and that means that they get a pretty big governmental subsidy each year to cover various expenses when it comes to their work to get more information, more knowledge, and more room for electrohypersensitivity in Sweden. And Swedish municipalities, they follow from the beginning something called the United Nations 22 Standard Rules. But since the year 2007, it has been upgraded into the United Nations Convention on Human Rights for Persons with Functional Impairments. And of course, all functional impairments is included. And now you may laugh, but I am also included there. When I cannot speak Spanish, I am functionally impaired. And the United Nations covers it in this special convention. As you would be when you come to Sweden, because you cannot speak Swedish, I guess. People with a functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, are entitled to have an equal life in a society based on equality. This sentence summarizes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages from the United Nations. This is all it's about. And I hope people here in Spain that are electrohypersensitive feel that they live an equal life in a society based on equality. To achieve this, we need various accessibility measures. In Sweden, for instance, we see a lot of them, and I'm sure you have equal such here for various types of functional impairments. Kneeling buses, faced-off sidewalks, wheelchair ramps, and so on, you know. In Sweden, impairments are viewed from the point of the environment. No human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. Very important. Thus, it is the environment that should be treated, not the persons. It's the environment. Olle Johansson, not knowing Spanish, he's not ill. He shouldn't have a medical drug or anything like that. He should have an assistant, which I always get when I get here. That's the accessibility measure. And it's interesting because the year 1999 to 2000, the Swedish government came with a special text called the Swedish Action Plan for Persons with Impairments. And it has a very special subtitle in Swedish. It says in green, from patient to citizen. Before that, people with impairments had been viewed as some kind of patients. But then Sweden realized, no, that's wrong. They are citizens, persons, not patients. And this implies that to force a person to quit one's employment or to move from one's home is a serious legal violation. The same goes for children. You are not allowed to discriminate them from their educational rights. Never. You must make the school accessible for anyone. So, in essence, persons with a functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, shall just enjoy their human rights. Nothing less, and nothing more. Just that. And so far, I have never met anyone who is willing to give up part of their human rights. Not even people from the telecom industry. No one. Everyone wants to have it. And it should, of course, come to everyone on this planet. So what can we now learn from science? And now you need the oxygen, because now I need to speed up a little bit to be able to cover some of the few papers I'm going to show. Very early we could show, and these are pictures from microscopic work. You see skin samples from normal healthy volunteers compared to persons with electrohypersensitivity. Up here you have the epidermis, the outermost portion of the skin, and this is the dermis. Each white dot represents a mast cell. The mast cell has nothing to do with telecom masts. It's a cell that belongs to the outermost portion of the immune system, and it reacts to, for instance, radiation of various forms. And you don't need to be a scientist to realize that, wow, electrohypersensitive persons, they do have a higher number. It's actually a very much higher number. And the cells look larger and they lie more superficially. And this cell and its content of histamine can actually explain all symptoms from all parts of the body that a person with electrohypersensitivity might have. Furthermore, this dramatic increase here may also have implications for the rocket-driven increase, at least in Sweden, when it comes to asthma, allergies, and other oversensitivities. It has been a dramatic increase. So maybe not only electrohypersensitive people react to the environment, maybe everyone does. If you look on C and D, we made an experiment where we exposed normal healthy volunteers to ordinary household television sets and ordinary household computer screens. And to make a long story short, the same increase we could see. And this increase mimics exactly what you would see if I was allowed to expose you to, for instance, uranium or plutonium, to X-ray, to strong ultraviolet light. This is a classical image of a radiation damage, textbook image. So from this year, we said to ourselves that, persons with electrohypersensitivity, they're not special, they are just damaged by radiation. And that became our working hypothesis. Other persons said that, no, there is nothing wrong with the computer. It's something wrong with the person. Something wrong with the personality, some psychiatric or psychological aberration. Coping at the workplace may be inferior. And very popular, the idea was launched that this was a mass media-driven psychosis. Meaning that when people listen to me, for instance, or read in a newspaper about electrohypersensitivity, then they start to sense that I'm probably a little bit electrohypersensitive myself, you know. A mass media-driven psychosis. To me, it's very odd, because all these explanations are so easy to study. You just turn to a rat. Rats don't listen to Olle Johansson. They don't read newspapers, they don't listen to radio, they don't watch television, and still they are damaged in exactly the same way as persons with electrohypersensitivity. As a sidetrack, in Sweden, persons with electrohypersensitivity was also investigated when it came to psychological and psychiatric aberrations, and they were found to be completely normal. One thing made them differ from the general population, namely that they could withstand strong harassments better. It's the same as when you kick your dog. After some time, the dog expects it. That was the only difference. They were so badly treated, so they expected to be badly treated, and therefore they could just cope with it. But otherwise, they were completely normal. Good to remember. Other scientists have shown that various forms of exposures, like from mobile phones, from Wi-Fi routers, from other types of exposures, can influence badly the quality of semen in men by decreasing the sperm count, the motility, viability, and changing the normal morphology. And as you know, in countries like in Spain, Italy, Sweden, and so on, the male sperm situation is quite dramatic. Like this. Maybe has something to do with this. Well, I leave it to you to decide. Others have studied fertility, and these Greek scientists showed in the 5th generation that mice that were subjected to very weak radiation from base stations, antennas, in the 5th generation became irreversibly infertile. That could mean that your grandchildren here in Spain cannot get babies any longer in the future. And then it's too late to call back and say, could you please stop doing this? Because we have a transgenerational effect that is very serious. These scientists have shown that exposure of pregnant women to mobile phones significantly increase fetal and neonatal heart rate and significantly decrease the cardiac output. In layman terms, that means that the babies are stressed. The heart goes on like this. If anyone is a parent in here or a grandparent, is that what you want for your children? No, of course not. And again, people get quite alarmed when they realize that there is a lot of information that they haven't received. Henry Lyon and his co-workers showed retarded learning in rats after only 45 minutes of exposure, and at an exposure level of 0.6 watts per kilogram. Remember that you should withstand here in Spain 2 watts per kilogram, so they were using a safe exposure. But after 45 minutes, these rats had a decrease in concentration capacity and a decrease in short-term memory. The same could be shown in boys that should solve the linguistic test. They did less well when they were exposed to mobile phone radiation. In Sweden, more and more, we are talking about that maybe the population, especially the young population, is actively being dumbed down because of all this exposure. And therefore, maybe we see in countries, especially in Asia, that they try to reduce the exposure as much as possible. Because China, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on, they have a goal. What is that goal? Well, they will have world supremacy. They want to have the entire market. And one way, of course, is to compete on that market with the most brilliant salesmen, scientists, and whatever. So think about that too. The most serious effect, above all, is the genotoxic one, the damage to the DNA molecule. And this is from the very famous reflex study. I will not go into that in any further detail. But again, remember that the scientists here only exposed for 24 hours, 1.3 watts per kilogram, saw a very dramatic destruction of the DNA, a fragmentization, at a level that was below the safety standard of 2 watts per kilogram. And they are not the only ones. If you read the literature, you will find, as someone said before, hundreds and thousands of studies going below, very much below, or extremely much below. And this study from 1997 is 100,000 times below the Spanish safety level, which thus doesn't protect you. You see effects on cell proliferation, cell cycle, leakage of blood-brain barrier, EEG brain waves are altered, DNA effects, calcium efflux effects, decrease in eating and drinking, etc. And therefore, I said in 1997 that all these different recommendations, this is the Spanish one, you are supposed to withstand 9 million microwatts per square meter. And people have suggested that it should be lowered, but there is only one person who has ever suggested a real, genuine hygienic safety value, and it's this guy. Because I said we must use the natural background into which we were born. And the natural background is this. And if you divide the Spanish recommendation for public exposure with this, the difference, the increase, is a quintillion times. That's a 1 with 18 zeros. That's a colossal exposure, astronomical exposure, or you can say a biblical exposure. The Bible turns out to be a pretty soft text, actually, compared to this. And you are sitting in it right now. I've seen that several of you have mobile phones with you, and you are exposed from base stations and so on. So you are sitting in this kind of exposure levels that are supposed to be safe, but they are not. And I will show it to you later on. When I showed this, or suggested this, 1997, then in this specific room we were in Stockholm at the trade union, one of my most fierce opponents were present, a very angry man. And he said the following: I never trust what Olle Johansson says, but this time he's dead right. That was flattering, coming from such a strong opponent. He agreed and said, this is the only meaningful safety exposure level. Someone mentioned plants before, and this is a very famous study from Alain Vion and his co-workers in France who exposed tomato plants and could show that they reacted with a damage sequence, including molecules such as calmodulin. And when he was interviewed in a radio program, he said in his broken English French, it was as if we had crushed them with a hammer. But they hadn't touched the tomato plants. They only exposed them to the invisible waves from a base station. And still they got this dramatic reduction. I don't sleep very well. I often lie awake in the night thinking about these studies plus around 27,000 more that are published already. And the one that really keeps me awake nowadays and keeps me on my knees praying to God that these scientists must be wrong, it's this study. Here they exposed bacteria to GSM mobile phone radiation and Wi-Fi router exposure. Nothing really happened, apart from one small thing. They became antibiotic resistant. A few months ago, the G20 countries had a specific meeting here in Europe because more than 25,000 Europeans die prematurely because of antibiotic resistance. By the year 2050, it has been calculated that more than 10 million people around the world will die prematurely. And in these calculations, this paper has not been included. This is from the last year, 2017. If you include this, then it could go really bad. Maybe the 10 million will become 7.3 billion instead. So please, God, make these scientists wrong. I talked immediately with clinicians in Sweden, and I said to surgeons, please tell me, antibiotic resistance, is this a big problem? Everyone said it's a huge problem, but we are not allowed to speak openly about it. And it's increasing by the day. So, again, something to think about. Finally, what are we doing about it and what are others up to? You know, I'm very old. and soon I will not be able to come here any longer, even if you ask me, because I will not have the strength any longer. Already in 1983, and most of you were not even born then, I coined an expression which many people have used. I said, this is the largest full-scale experiment ever. What happens when we, 24 hours around the clock, wherever we are, allow ourselves and our children to be used as guinea pigs, whole body irradiated, and as you saw, at colossal exposure levels for the rest of our lives. And you know, Swedes, they are not like you. I've seen when I walked around today in Madrid, people are, caramba, and they're having a party, and they're dancing, and they're singing, and so on, No, Swedes are not like that. Swedes are dull, boring, and repetitive. They keep on whining and nagging about the same things all the time, and so have I. I have repeated this year after year after year after year after year, 2018, and I will probably continue repeating myself for the years to come, because no one seems to answer the question. Well, some have answered. Benevento, a small municipality and town outside of Naples in Italy in 2006, allowed 29 professors and myself to publish a resolution, and this was the first time it was published in a peer-review-based scientific journal. And among the things that we demanded was that one should use the precautionary principle. And as you know, that's based in the United Nations texts. One should also inform the population, as we are doing now, and we should limit cell phone and cordless phone use by young children and teenagers. Others, like the London resolution, which included myself and a few other colleagues, we again said we must use the precautionary principle, and we even said we must propose that children under 16 should use mobile phones and cordless phones for emergency calls only. And now a new thing has appeared. 2006, we didn't have Wi-Fi, WiMAX, and other forms of wireless networking. They should not be allowed to be placed in homes, schools, and public areas, we said. And we kept on writing resolutions. We kept on writing to governments, parliaments, health authorities, radiation protection authorities, and so on. And in 2010, we published, and I have, 700, 800, 900 publications. If I should pick one, this is it. This is the most important publication I have ever co-authored. And it's the Selatan Statement. Done in Norway at the meeting. It took many, many months to formulate the text, but then it was finalized and published 2010. And then we said that the scientific panel recognizes that the body of evidence on EMF requires a no approach to protection of public health, the growth and development of the fetus and of children, and argues for strong preventative actions. New biologically based public exposure standards are urgently needed to protect public health worldwide. And we were very proud to find the year after that the European Council had written a resolution 1815, which you have touched upon previously, and it's entirely based on the Selatan Statement. They used it word by word. And you have done the same here. I'm very impressed, and I had the great honor, together with Elizabeth Kelly from the United States, to co-author and co-sign the International Scientific Medical Declaration from 2017, and today you will renew it in 2018, and where you have stated that public administration at all levels, state, regional, autonomous, and local, are requested to apply to the European Council Resolution 1815 as soon as possible, making it part of their rules and regulations. That's very good. It's a very good start, and I bow to you all for that. What about the precautionary principle in real life? I said in my beginning that nearly all countries, but there are countries that are doing things. And not only Spain, but France, Nigeria, Solomon Islands, Uganda, Malaysia, Japan, Belgium, and Indonesia has various forms of bans for students and children in schools, inside and outside of schools. Also in Maryland, United States, and Cyprus. But where is Sweden, I could ask myself. We don't have such a ban. Swedish kids are exposed, Jesus, everywhere where they live, work, go to school, sleep, and so on. But these countries have done things. And it's a little bit, how should you say, embarrassing in a sense, because being a Swede, you always think that Sweden is best, we should be at the forefront. But instead we have Nigeria, Uganda, Indonesia. I mean, they are not countries that I would automatically think about when it comes to active protection of children and teenagers. But they are before us, and before Spain as well, So here they have used a real precautionary principle. And of course, much more can be done. So, in summary, do not believe that mobile phones, iPads, and Wi-Fi are safe. They are not. And as you soon will see, the major players, who could that be, in our society already know it. These gadgets and their electromagnetic fields interfere with normal brain function, learning and memory, fertility, cancer risks, and have been shown to shatter the DNA in cells. All of this can be found in peer-review-based scientific journals, but until now has not been in the public domain. But who are the major players? They use another precautionary principle. Americans have a very good saying, and I quote, "When in doubt," if you don't trust me, for instance, "when in doubt, always follow the money." And there are a few powerful players, like the World Health Organization, the Radiation Protection Authorities, the telecom operators, the telecom manufacturers, and all insurance and reassurance companies around the world. They have listened carefully and many years ago completely abandoned the safe ship. They do not in any form take any form of responsibility or liability claims on board. You are on your own with your government and parliament. So when the bill is going to be paid, they will not assist you. Did you know that? Did you know that the insurance and reassurance companies, they have an officially published blacklist? And right now on the hotel television, they have a program series about that from Russian television, RT. Because on that list, you have health effects of electromagnetic fields, but you also have other things that are safe. Nanotechnology, which you find in cosmetics, for instance. GMO, gene-modified organisms, which you find in a lot of food products. But here Spain is good. You have actually tried to stop that, actually, but most other countries in the world do not. And a few other things. The list is rather short. And they are saying, no, we do not take any form of responsibility for that. And they're allowed to. They are private companies. They decide themselves what they want to insure. But it's telling, it's much more telling than any publication I could show to you, or any discussion with lengthy words or complicated equations. This is telling. This tells you what they said 2002 in London at the meeting. They said the following: it's not the question whether there are health effects or not. The only question is who is going to pay for it in the future, and we will not do it. I was there. I heard it. It was published in all major newspapers, for instance, in Sweden. So the citizens are informed, but they are occupied with liking each other on Facebook and sending photographs in the Instagram and so on. So they don't pay attention to the real hardcore stuff. And that may, of course, be a mistake. So maybe the only correct answer to my question, what happens and so on, is No more full-scale experimentation until they climb on board again to cover any form of future legal liability claims. Someone said several times in the lecture the word ninja. I don't know what that means. But sometimes I feel like a ninja, like a warrior on the barricades. I have been up there since the late 70s, early 80s, and things have changed. Trust me, the very first lecture I gave was underground in a dark, ice-cold bicycle shed. Nowadays, I'm allowed to come to places like this. It's a tremendous honor to be here today, and thank you so much for listening.